There you go.
All right, thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Neary Building Committee meeting. It's Thursday, July 18th. It is currently 7:01 p.m. and we have 5 of our 7 members present. Is anyone ready to look at the minutes? I know we just got them, or would you like to pass on those until Monday night?
I haven't looked at them.
I looked at him, but I'm going to abstain because I wasn't there, Jason.
Then we will pass those to Monday night then. Then we will go, I am not aware of any subcommittee meetings, so I'm going to skip over that unless someone stops me.
Oh.
Okay, so we'll go into the Skanska and Arrow Street updates here. My thought in terms of how we go through this is a couple of different ways. One, on the site analysis. Katie, could you just give a quick update on the perk testing and any status updates you have there?
Yeah, we have a perk test tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, the 24th. So next Wednesday. Let's see, I spoke to Barbara at the Board of Health. The open question is whether or not Dennis Costello is going to attend the perk test, or there is a second person who stands in occasionally. Dennis is on vacation, and he should be back online on Monday, so she's going to touch base with him then. And we have our consultant, our soil evaluator lined up and all set for the 24th. So barring anything going wrong with either Dennis or his proxy being able to stand in, we will have the perk testing performed on Wednesday of next week.
And Bill Cundiff is all set too?
I'll notify him of it today. I need to send the final, let's see, the soil evaluator needs to go out and mark the locations tomorrow. And I had spoken about the specific locations with our civil engineer based on the reports that we have of the different site conditions where there is wetlands or water or those sort of things. So we have a map for them to go out and mark that tomorrow, and I will notify Bill Cundiff at the same time. This actually basically came about late today, so that's where I'm sending out the notifications.
Any other site-related questions or on this? Okay. Next is the square footage in the programming. I guess there's 2 steps as I'm aware of on this. Is one, Katie, I think there were maybe some updates to spreadsheets that you wanted to maybe walk through. And then I believe Kathy and Andrew, you had questions. I know at least Kathy submitted questions. I don't know, Andrew, if you got to submitting questions, but I do think this would be the appropriate forum to try and resolve those questions while we have the design team, the full building committee, and the superintendent here. So I guess, Katie, maybe you can update us on where you're at, and then we can go to any questions that Kathy, Andrew, or others had on the square footage and programming.
Jason,
Sure.
just to be clear, what I sent today is a combination of Kathy and Andrew doing that together as far as working as Neary Building Committee members on these possible reductions in square footage.
So
All right, perfect.
I'll talk about the overall first, and then we can pull up. Larry, do you want to prime up the PDF that we have about the comments as far as possible reductions? But I'll talk about first what Kathy had flagged to us about the auditorium in our spreadsheet.
Sure.
From all of our
FYI, Andrews did the flagging.
Okay.
But he found
credit
it.
where credit is due. Thank you, Andrew. I had been going through the comments from the MSBA at the same time. You'll see the email that we sent out just late this afternoon was summarizing that the MSBA, sorry, this is a short lead into how I discovered the error as well, that the MSBA would like us to categorize the auditorium not under art and music, but in fact under other. And when I made that change in the spreadsheet, I realized that something was awry. I saw Kathy's email after I had left for the day, basically calling out the same thing. So what had happened was we had been early in our discussions talking about the different square footages in our summary. And here I will share my screen now so that people can see the summary that we were talking about. Just changing my settings. There we go. So this line that says art and music, which I will highlight so that people can see in this area. What we had been doing was carrying the auditorium. We were trying to subtract to show the gross square footage, not including the auditorium. You'll see this line here that says not including auditorium. But when we had one of our meetings with the district and we were looking at the individual spreadsheets, the tabs that go for the two different enrollments that we currently have, we saw that one was in that tab and I zeroed it out because we were talking at that point about having the auditorium carried separately, talking about having the number and the calculations for it being in a separate spot. So that was basically not realizing that this line was also subtracting the auditorium. So this is a little bit of the this particular summary tab has become quite complicated, and I didn't realize that it was subtracting in both locations. So I apologize. Thank you for pointing that out. We have it now corrected in this spreadsheet, in this summary. I can also scroll to the bottom. You'll see these are the current numbers now. The bottom portion of this that Jim had presented before is calculated from the values above. And also in an email sent to Jason and a few people, the 305 enrollment and the 610 enrollment. So it's the full spreadsheet where you can see all of the calculations spelled out.
Katie, I
can-
haven't had a chance to look at anything you may have sent really recently. Andrew and I spent a long time the last few days working on the square footage, and our numbers are a little bit different from these. Yours are slightly better. Has anything else changed besides that? We've got 66,870 after fixing the error for 305 and 104,717.
If you're coming up with 35 square feet different, we found a storage room that we don't need because it went to guidance that we realized
we
we're not having a
agree.
guidance office.
Yeah, we agree. That was one of our notes to take it out because there's no office, but it's not 35, it's 920, it looks like.
That was the only one that would have made any kind of calculation difference. I can share either of these two other spreadsheets if you want to see how it calculates.
Well, let's not waste everybody's time. Let's just, at this point, I want to make sure that what Andrew and I've done reconciles with yours. So we'll do it offline, but it is different.
Okay, we'll find that 900.
But you have taken the 35 out to get to the 65, 930 and the 103.
Yes, I did
754.
correct the storage room, realizing we don't need that storage room since it doesn't have an office to accompany it. So these will be submitted with the packet for anyone who wasn't copied on in the email. Second to that, Kathy, you had some questions about some possible reductions as far as MSBA minimum requirements that I believe Larry, I'm not sure if you have screen share. Andrew, did you give him?
Yeah, excuse me, just realizing I don't have screen share.
I just hit allow, so you should be able to.
Okay. Hopefully folks can see that now.
Yep.
Okay, and let's get you guys back up on my screen. There we go. Okay, so what we did, so once Katie had made some adjustments to the spreadsheet, what I tried to do was take your markups and sort of convert them into a question because it seemed like you were asking certain things and felt like that would be helpful. And I'll just roll through them. I think they're pretty consistent between the 305 and the 610. This happens to be the 305 that I have up. Starting at the top suggestion was whether we could use 13 classrooms instead of 14. The MSBA, if you do the exact math, you come up with the 13 classrooms. And in conversations with the district, it seemed to make sense to have 14 so you had an equal number for each grade and you weren't trying to figure out which grade happened to be bigger or smaller. I'll note that the additional classroom was accepted by the MSBA as part of the reimbursement in their response to our PDB comments. And I think this one is somewhat of a normal thing that the MSBA sort of allows that kind of thing to go on.
Can we
Next
make
question.
a comment? Can we make a comment to each one of these? Because these really
Sure.
want questions
Sure.
as much as suggestions. And I'm on this island with Andrew, so I'm not here by myself. So Andrew was very much part of this. In fact, he's
Sure.
really good at. So we actually looked at MSBA guidelines as well as other recent projects with other similar schools. So we did both to come up with this. I mean, we realize I think it's actually 13 point something. But remember, Larry, I think, and this is me speaking, we have got to get some more square footage out of this project. Given the mistake with the auditorium, we're back out of what I consider the norm as far as other schools go. So we just worked real hard to go back. We looked at white papers, MSBA. I mean, we really spent hours on this to look at what they suggest. So these are not necessarily questions as much as possible suggestions based on what we think the guidelines are. So yeah, 14, 13 doesn't sound like much, but we are just striving really hard to try to get some square footage out of this. We've got some other things to suggest in a few minutes, but we really worked hard to try to see if there's not ways to do the program that Greg wants and still get some square footage out of both permutations.
Okay. Greg, looks like you got your hand up, so.
Yeah, so I can also just speak to where the number of 14 classrooms came from. Part of that work was really looking at the number of sections that we have or historically reached in terms of each grade level. So 7 was kind of the max. So that's where we did 7 and 7 for 14. So Kathy, I do agree there's probably space, but I think for future proofing and not having to then take another classroom that is designed for another space, I think it'd be challenging only to have 13 classrooms.
And remember, Greg, I'm trying to help you get a project approved here.
Yes, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you where we. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask the question differently? I guess, Larry, is in the spaces that Kathy and Andrew identified, were there any that jumped out at you as potentially needing to revisit? And that goes to Greg too, because my general sense is I'd prefer to see a situation where we actually get the cost estimate back and potentially go to another level of design before we take things off, because I want to see if it actually is going to cost what it is. I know it's not going to magically come down tens of millions, but I don't want to preemptively start cutting things. But I do think it's nice to have a punch list or whatever else you want to call it to consider as we have to continue to sharpen our pencils to try to get a project that will pass. I don't know if any stood out to anyone as you looked at their comments.
Well, we just sort of wanted to go down the sort of what were the comments and then what's the logic to date behind it, not trying to suggest one way or the other, but give you guys the information. Sorry, Greg, your hand's back up. I don't know if you want to jump in on that. And then, oh, hand came down. Okay, Denise, his hand is up.
I think, not to reiterate, but I do think I understand where Kathy's coming from about square footage and getting the cost down. And I understand where Jason is coming from. And I kind of want to lean towards getting an idea of what this costs in totality, both proposals, and then whittling down what we need to in order to get a number that's acceptable through using the school department's idea of what they actually simply need versus the amount of money it's going to cost. Because right now, I think it's kind of a pig in a poke. We don't know what it's going to cost until we go out to estimate. Then it's our responsibility to come down and pare the situation down.
But
Do
the
you agree
problem with
me?
that, Denise, is the timeline. So we get the estimate back on August 6th. Finance subcommittee, I've got this all teed up with the town treasurer and our outside bond consultant to work with me on, because Andrew and I can't work together. We're a quorum. So we're going to work together that Wednesday and Thursday, and then be ready for the subcommittee meeting on Friday. And then we meet on Monday and vote. So I don't see how we have a chance to adjust anything once the estimate gets back. If we don't, at least try to adjust things tonight. So I just ask everybody to please listen to what we did and hear our reason for it. We really thought through this. We didn't just do things arbitrarily. In fact, Larry, you've misunderstood the learning commons, what we want to do there, which we'll explain in a second. We don't want to eliminate them. MSBA gives you like 15 different ways to do it and reduce the amount of square footage. So I'll let Andrew explain that one, because that's one he came up with. So anyway,
Okay, yeah, I may have
I would
misinterpreted.
be doing this, but it's just so expensive. I still think we've got to get some square footage out of this to make this palatable.
Yeah, I think in terms of the learning commons, right? I think, you know, in reading through the breakout space presentation that MSBA did and all the different options, right? Learning commons is one of them, right? There's shared vestibules, there's shared support rooms, neighborhood clusters. Each one of these has a different square footage. Some are more than what we're looking at, some are a lot less, right? But I think it's, you know, and I had asked this probably 2 or 3 meetings ago. Have we looked at each one of those options and ruled them out? Because some have a significant square footage savings and would still give a shared spaces. I also read in there that they are doing a pilot program of putting the learning commons in the media center. So I don't know if that also was looked at, but I think that was still the ask. And so what we kind of did is looked at, I think we looked at just one of the options, which was a shared support room, which basically you just increase the size of the classroom, and then it's basically shared between two adjacent classrooms. So it's like but the square footage is basically included in the size of the classroom.
And it's reimbursable completely if you do it that way.
Because I haven't seen what came back from MSBA, but my assumption was everything in orange here that didn't have an MSBA guideline and had a variation was not reimbursable. But did we get like the 14 classrooms? Did everything else get approved as reimbursable, or is it still below the
There
line?
are a few of these that they've asked for responses to, but not everything. Not everything
Okay.
in yellow. The things in yellow are just not automatically in their template. They are unique spaces that we have to fill in and describe in the ed plan. But not everything that's in yellow is not reimbursable. There are a lot of things, the special education spaces, those are all shown in yellow and those are all reimbursable. So it's not a universal answer just because it's shaded in yellow.
Well,
Did
then
we get
what does the shading mean, Katie? Because we thought that it did mean it's not reimbursable.
It just means it's not straight out of their template. So the spaces that they automatically fill in for you, and you'll see some of the comments on the side that say allowable and that. But especially, I mean, think about special education. Every district has different spaces, different sizes. So they don't bother to try and describe all those spaces. They ask the district to put them in.
Are you
and what
able
about,
to take, sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what about learning commons? Are those going to be reimbursable, or is that?
They asked for a more description of how those are going to be used.
Okay.
And I think part of the conversation could be also about some of the STEM space that we've been describing and how those become a sort of a space together, and allotting some of the space that the learning commons, the way that we have them drawn, and maybe when we go to the options, we can show you a little bit, zero in on that a little bit, because they're in the center of the corridors. Part of the space is corridor space because you actually need it for egress. Part of it will be learning space that could be the learning commons, and part could be the STEM because we're talking about having a countertop and a projector and some things like that. So we can describe that space as sort of a combination of three.
So in that theory, part of that space should come out of grossing factor.
The part that's the corridor would, yes.
Correct.
Covered.
So
Are we
Katie,
done?
there's one that actually is included in the grossing factor, so you don't have to put any square footage, so you actually can consider that part of the grossing factor. So there was just so many choices there. We just want to make sure you really had looked at them and had tried to pick one that was really efficient and still accomplish what Greg and his educational team want. And then you keep saying STEM. I thought you took STEM out, and one of our comments was, we think it should be back in. We don't know why you take the STEM room out in this day and age.
That was the one I wasn't quite sure, because we have eliminated it based on, as Katie was saying, the district said that they could do the STEM experiments and other things in the Learning Commons. And I think much of it was based on the example that we saw out in the Pine Hill School in Westwood. And we can try and find some pictures and or plans, or take some folks out to see that, if that is helpful to understand. Greg, you
If
got your hand
Greg
back
is
up.
happy with that, we just didn't understand why it got taken out, because all the schools we looked at still had it in there as a STEM room. So we just didn't understand why, again, in this day and age, that got taken out. But if Greg is happy with the alternative to having a separate room, then I'm not, we literally added that back in our numbers.
Okay.
So see, we didn't take away everything. We added back too. Greg.
So I can talk to the thinking, the team's thinking around the STEM rooms. So of the, I believe, 5 or 6 schools that we did visit, they all had a STEM room. None were occupied when we went to visit. So that was one question we had. So it was more flexible space. Also in MSBA's comments, they asked how that space was going to be staffed. Our plan is not to staff with a STEM teacher, a STEM room. So the conversation really centered around these learning commons that a grade level will flow into, and having science space, so science experiments and the work that would take place in a STEM classroom can take place in the learning common. We did see that in the Westwood model. And to me, that was the most flexible use of space without having to carve out specific classrooms for STEM that necessarily wouldn't be staffed in our particular model.
Yeah, and I would say, I believe the MSBA guidance is, if you don't staff the room, they're not sure they're going to reimburse it, because they do end up being sort of a little used space sometimes if it's not properly staffed and equipped and all those things.
How can we tell from this what you believe is reimbursable or not? I, again, thought it was a yellow that you didn't think so. So I've made a mistake in some computations I've been doing. So how can we tell what you believe at this point is reimbursable?
Well, the MSBA has responded to our initial space summary template with a lot of questions, and they've been specific in areas where they say your sizes exceed their standards, and therefore they're not going to be reimbursing those. And I say we don't have the laundry list of that from the response to comments we got end of last week. So we're working on that. We can come up with a separate list of that. Certainly the auditorium was highlighted. A few other spaces were a little large, and those highlighted.
And Larry, the reason I think that's important is there's 5 factors I'm going to bring up at some point once we get through this, that I think we should challenge as far as assumptions. I think the assumptions are overly conservative. And one of those is the reimbursement rate. But the computation I've done, again, is assume what's in yellow is not reimbursable. I think the reimbursement rate is something closer to 23% effectively, maybe even 24. And it may not sound like a lot between 18 and 24, but on a big project, 6% is a lot of money. It can start getting us down to what I think may be palatable to make this work with town's finances. So it's important that we really do have not just a general estimate of the 18. You look at the other schools, the 18 is really, it looks low. So that's one comment I'm going to make in a minute as far as how to truly hone in on that more realistic reimbursement rate. But you got to know what's reimbursable first.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, Yeah, I would caution you with that. Because at the PSR submittal, they'll review what they will participate, the SD submittal. We won't know that effective rate until we have a project funding agreement, which is after the project scope and budget. So I would highly suggest we carry a very conservative number because this number can swing. While doing the exercise that we're doing now, trying to maximize spaces, limit spaces that are over guidelines. Because it can take swings depending on the determination of the MSBA.
Jim, I'm not saying we shouldn't be conservative. I think we are being overly conservative. So there's an adjective in front of conservative. So let's just keep going. We can talk about that later.
Okay, next up was a question about the large music room, which is currently scheduled at 1,800 square feet. The MSBA standard, which I think was highlighted in those comments, is 1,200 square feet. In talking to the district, it's clear that the band and choral rehearsals are pretty well attended, large groups, and so this size is appropriate for trying to teach those large groups. I will note that in the event the auditorium continues, there's an adjustment that we've talked about, that this music room would reduce in size because essentially you'd use the stage for that purpose. But for the accounting rationale, this is staying at 1,800 for this purpose. But Greg, I don't know if you have comments on that you want to add to that.
Sure. So I did meet with our music educators and really talked about current space and what space is required in a new building to continue that work. So currently there are 2 spaces that are used pretty much full time every day by our music educators. That is a typical classroom. That is the one space that you'll see. And then currently at Neary, there is the stadium seating room, which holds between 50 to 75 students. So what we did was we talked about what type of space. We worked with Arrow Street on trying to identify the square footage that would be needed to house that number of students at the same time. And we came up with 1,800. So that was the thinking around the music program. Also, there's been a lot of conversation. If there's an auditorium, could we use that space? But I think forget removing the auditorium. This is the space that we feel to continue the current music program. I think that we could look at 1,800 square feet and, have a conversation with Larry and Katie around what does 1,600 square feet look like. I know it's a small amount, but again, start winnowing down as much as we can so that, piece by piece, it does add up. I understand.
But if the MSBA recommends 1,200 and the other school projects we looked at were 1,200 or less, why is our school any different than other schools as far as what we need for this? I'm gonna stop there. But when we get to the next one, which is related, that one really does seem to be too much for what you're trying to do with ensembles. Ensembles, are 5 people, maybe 7 people. So
Well,
the 2 things to me are related. That's just a lot of space. And I'm all for music. I was a music major. I'm all for it. But it just doesn't look like it's comparable to other recent projects, nor is it, it's 50% more than what the MSBA says is reimbursable.
So I'll just point out, Greg, you mentioned the classroom size, which was the next comment down, which is 950, one at 950. And the question was, could they be changed to 2 small practice rooms, which if you were doing just practice rooms, that's frequently a number that gets used, a small space for a teacher and a student to use. But in this case, it's really that classroom size space that Greg was just talking about.
So you have 2 classroom size spaces.
One at 950 and one at 1,800.
And those are used all day, every day by that large of So if the 1800 has 75 kids, right? Then we'll say, what, there's 50 kids in the other one. So the entire school spends half the day in music class every day, right? There's 300 kids or so at Neary.
Yeah, so we have general music every day for all classes, right? So that's one room. And then we have orchestra, band, and chorus classes happening as well. So those rooms are, these are the questions, this is the work we did with through the ed programming work, talking with our music educators, looking at scheduling. These classrooms are used pretty much all day long. I mean, they are heavily used spaces. I think the question is what's different between one school to another school. I think, participation in music programs can be different. But again, this is looking at what current space we have at Neary for music and trying to replicate that. It's not trying to expand it, it's trying to replicate it for current programming.
Denise has had her hand up for a while. Denise, I don't know if you have
Nope.
anything you want to.
Sorry, Denise, didn't see
Yeah.
that.
No, that's okay. So when we're talking about 1,000 versus 1,800, if I remember correctly in dealing with these people long ago, they will look at the entire proposal and then they will, if they only pay for 1,000, they will intend in their formula to use 1,000. It's then up to us when we get their total commitment to pare down where we need. Is that correct, Greg, or am I wrong?
I think it's a question for Jim and Katie and Larry.
Okay.
Well, I would say the MSBA tries to keep the ed plan and program tied to the building, starting really at PDP, but continuing in the PSR and then in schematic, so that as we change these size spaces, and we were talking to Greg about this the other day, is we will need to justify these changes educationally to the MSBA so they understand and approve of the changes. If you're shrinking down, you say, okay, we don't need a STEM room. We need to tell them the reason that we're going to be able to do it is because we have these other spaces available for those activities. So they will go through that process at every step and turn, asking to make sure that, because the last thing they want is for a town to be trying to squeeze the project such because they know dollars are tight everywhere, but not meet the educational program requirements. So we've talked to Greg about making sure as we go that we're justifying these both in terms of the changes, but also in terms of the impact on the ed plan and how that's being adjusted.
Yeah, and
when we
Oh,
find out what their actual number is that they're going to pay for, will we then shrink what we need in order to accommodate this funding? If you understand what I mean, if we find out that they are only going to pay for 1,000 and Greg feels he needs 1,800, at that point, are we going to be allowed to make that? We should be allowed to make the decision, correct?
Well, we're kind of doing that now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we're
Right.
right now we're saying they're only going to do 1,200 unless miraculously we give enough of a case for them to do 1,800. But I don't know how often that's happened. But
Well, I don't know. They were just saying that they want the programs to fit. And if I heard Greg correctly, he's saying you're replicating the space we now have in Neary. And that's all he's trying to do. If we're using 1,800 at Neary, then there's an argument and a case for using 1,800. But if we're not, that's a different story.
I'd be happy to, through the chair, I'd be happy to sit with Arrow Street with Katie and Larry and invite our music educators and talk about the spaces again, just to make sure that we're on point.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, we can do that. And one thing we often do is if they have a sense of how many students are actually in that particular section, we can then do a layout and say, okay, here's how a band would fit. And to your point, it could be that we can chisel 18 to 15 or something like that. But knowing full well that we should be looking at layouts of seats, not just talking about square footage.
Greg, is that what you had your hand up for? Or you had something else? Oh, I see it's down. Nope, sorry. down.
That was it, Jason.
Um,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Kathy, I see your hand up.
So Denise, I'll direct this one at you as far as this ability to adjust once we have made our decision on August 12th. So on August 12th, if we stay on our schedule, we're going to decide either 2 grade or 4 grade, right? That's our 2 choices. And if we decide 2 grade, we've taken the 4 grade off the table. So for those that want 4 grade, and for those that want 4 grade but don't think we can afford 4 grade right now, then you're not giving those people the ability to try to get to a 4 grade because there's just not the money to be able to do it. So you stick with the 2nd grade. So if you want the 4 grade, then you got to adjust it now because then you will encourage votes for the 2 grade and you're done. So you're not going to get the 4 grade. So I'm just trying to find a way to keep that flexibility open between the 2 because there's certainly economy of scale with the 4 grade. I think that's what Greg and his team want, but I just don't think we can get there financially with what we're seeing so far. And that's why being more realistic about some of these assumptions, still being conservative is, I still think, key, which we can talk about in a second. So Greg, I didn't realize you put the word ensemble, and that's probably a misnomer. Ensemble is 5, 6, 6. So if you mean that's for the band and for the course, that's actually a little bit different. I know how great the Neary music program is. I know how really great the Trotter music program is. I am all for music, but it does, when the MSBA says you only need 1,200, it gives me pause.
So can I make a suggestion is on this, I think, Greg, it'd be helpful for you to have that discussion with music teachers, but more importantly, I think someone keep me honest here, isn't the cost estimate going to give us the ability when we get it back in a few weeks to price out? I realize, Kathy, the time is very limited there, but if we have critical decisions at that point, right, to decide 1,000 versus 1,800 for this space as an example, and it really is going to make a difference between what path we take, we'll have the data available to us there to say, I'm just picking an arbitrary number here. If we were able to find 3,000 square feet, it may make the difference between a 2 and a 4 grade vote. And we'll have the data available to us there. I continue to be very hesitant to start cutting around the edges here. I fully appreciate the cost considerations and that we're not where we are at yet, but we've made some progress here on the amount of space. And I'm cautiously optimistic that as they start looking at some of the general conditions and other things, that we're going to be closer to where we want to be. Although I acknowledge nothing is ever going to be perfect in this area, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the data is going to be there for us to splice that out. So I'm wondering if that's a conversation for 2 weeks from now to make an informed decision. And that's a great way where the finance subcommittee could come and say, if we didn't have these 3 spaces, we're recommending this, versus if we had these 3 spaces, we're recommending that. That may be impactful. And then it would allow Greg to react and say, this is a non-starter and here's why educationally, and allow the committee to then react on cost versus educational plan.
Jason, let me just speak as myself. Currently, we're at $80 million, I think, if I remember from the summary. I can't even support a 2 grade school at $80 million. It's too much square footage per student, and it's too much cost per student. I can't even vote for that, right? So this is my last ditch effort to try to get the square footage to a point at which we're not super high on the chart of square footage per pupil, and the costs down to a point at which I can support. That's just being candid.
I understand that, but I'm trying to understand how much we're looking at total square, because these are comments for consideration, but there's some toggles up and down here. So I'm just trying to figure out, where's that happy medium, at least from your individual perspective. Is it 5,000 additional square feet gets you to a different spot? Is it 2,000? Because I think that changes the dynamic of how much we're looking to potentially narrow down in this conversation with where we go in terms of next steps. Do you have a number? on the square footage that you're looking to?
Probably 5,000. It's probably pretty close. It,
Along with other reductions in some of the assumptions, which we can get to in a moment.
yeah, 5,000 on the program spaces.
Yeah.
Or whatever they call it.
And that's what we came up with, something pretty close to that last night. And you add back the, we added back 1,000 for the science room. So you take that back out. I think we are at 5, right, Andrew? We're close
Something
to
like
it.
that, yeah, close to it.
So I think, Greg, you haven't had much time to think about some of these spaces, correct?
I mean, I've had a lot of time to think about spaces. I think the I think what would be helpful, I mean, first of all, I do not want to make these decisions in a vacuum. This space summary is not as a result of Greg Martineau sitting and saying, okay, this is ideal. This is a lot of conversation. I know you all know that. So I think as we look at these spaces, it's not just, Stephanie Reinhorn and me looking at this and making a decision. It's actually getting teachers back at the table and saying, hey, I'm working with Larry and Katie. I know time is of the essence. But if we have a number, we can go and look and we say, without impacting the educational program, can we get there? Or how close can we get there? That's something that we could do in the short term. And I'll just use an example, looking at the classroom size of 950 square feet. Do we look at 900 square feet? And then, we gain, square footage there. So, but I don't want to make those decisions in a vacuum, because it's really, Kathy, I appreciate your comments around, my job as a superintendent is to look at educational programming. Everyone has their role, but I also want to be realistic about the cost and the goals to move a project forward. So we can look at that work, but there's not a lot of time to do that. We'll have to move quickly.
So we've got a few more that are smaller, but there are a few more that, again, just because it's so expensive per square foot, they add up also.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go down there, and I was just collecting some of the comments. Oops, sorry, while I save that. Let's see. Gym storeroom, we've currently programmed based on conversations with Greg and his group, 300 square feet. MSBA standard is 150 square feet. So that is certainly an area that can be discussed. We talked about, I think at the top, that the guidance office and the storeroom were both eliminated.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to highlight that. And
You agree,
then,
you agree with us?
yeah, those were taken out.
We got 35 square feet off, so we're
There
getting
you
there.
go.
Okay,
There you
hey,
go.
We're making progress. We're moving in the
Okay.
right direction.
Network and telecom office room you were suggesting could be 100 square feet. Typically we go with 200 until we have a better sense of what we're trying to put in there. I agree with you. My goal is never to have the room bigger than it needs to be. But I'm not sure we can show 100 square feet, but the question is everything going to fit? So we can sort of put that on hold for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for every, so that 100 square feet there is, based upon how we're calculating it right now, it's about $150,000.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, some of these storerooms, right? I mean, that goes along with a lot of tennis balls and basketballs and stuff we can do for the gym. There's a lot of, the configuration you can do with the networking and racks and organization to make it efficient, right? That having extra space, while it's great at this construction cost, is just, I mean, we could buy new basketballs every day and throw the old ones away for what the cost is to store them. So I just think trying to keep that storage space and some of these places, the grossing factor, all these extra hallway type spaces, extra nooks and crannies to a minimum saves us a lot of money in the long run.
I agree. It just tricky because we don't really have a layout. So we can't really say, okay, this is what fits.
Yeah.
And depending on the shape of the building, this may end up being 2 rooms at 100 because they can only be a certain distance apart from each other. If we have
Correct.
2 floors or 3 floors, you typically have 1 per floor. So it may end up being 70 square foot per floor because you've got 1 on each floor as you rack them back down to the MDF room. So, I agree with you. I just often am cautious about making assumptions that we can squeeze it on the program side, and then we're stuck trying to fit it on the actual physical side.
Yeah, and maybe for discussion purposes, we just have a range. I think that would be more useful for people to see, because right now it's showing as an absolute, right? So if you said, okay, network is between 100 and 200, right? They're both there. We're not taking total square footage away, but we can say on the worst case scenario, we're at this total square footage. On the best case scenario, we're at this total square footage. So we have a range of cost. We're not going to know that till we get further along in design, but
Yep.
I think it's easier to make a case when we start doing some of that flexibility.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate all that. The MSBA is pretty absolute in their template.
Yeah.
But we can talk that through. Let's see, 2 things we wanted to point out. The MSBA in their comments did ask that we move the auditorium down here to what's known as other. So you'll see that change in the upcoming templates. They also asked us to move the instrument storage and extended day program storage down to non-program space, which means essentially these are coming out of the 0.5 multiplier that you're adding as part of the net to gross. So just that's a move that's going to look a little different from the spreadsheet you'll see going forward from the one you may see up until now. And then the other comment I believe was, could this instrument storage be reduced to 1 versus currently 2 scheduled at 150? So Greg, that is probably a question we could have a discussion with the music teachers, assuming we're getting back together again quickly to talk through the music, the large music room.
Agreed.
Did you see our note on extended day?
Sorry, let me just finish that one. I'm not sure I did. Let's see. Extended day. I must have, maybe I missed it. What was your note?
We talked about this at the last meeting, and I thought Greg was possibly moving in this direction, which is we don't have the ability to put the storage and or the office at Neary. We've got room at Finn and Woodward to do that. There's no such thing right now. So let's use a different school for that we already have and not spend. Well, now you've moved it down, so I guess the 500 is a 500 and not 750. Right, Larry?
Well, they
it's
asked us to move
300 and
this.
200 had storage, so I don't know what
Yeah,
happened.
the office is gone. So at least the office is, yeah.
The office is gone?
Yeah.
Well, extended day program office.
Oh no, program
Oh,
office
no.
is up there. Okay, so
Program office
300 and
here.
300. So instead of 750, it's 600.
Right. And 750 is $750,000. So this is one I feel real strongly about.
So I think we can look at this. We do have storage space in each of our buildings for extended day, but not office space. So that is an option, Kathy.
I think Greg, the extended day would then not happen at Neary, right?
It would,
No, it would.
Okay.
The program itself will be at all three schools like they,
So we have-
they use a classroom.
so I will share that in the 2 through 5 model, we would consolidate to one site or to 2 sites for extended day. And the thinking behind the office, in one particular model, there were the SEDP office was parallel to the main office. It was a small office, but they could buzz people in and out of the buildings for people who were attending extended day. And that was a nice design and safety feature, which we currently have, but that would be more conducive for the 2 through 5 model.
I think what we see from our side is oftentimes the extended day has an office somewhere, and sometimes it gets stuffed in the back of a storage room or somewhere else. And usually they have various supplies and things that they're trying to find homes for. So frequently we're seeing districts asking for this activity. If it's not happening at Neary, then it can be elsewhere, but inevitably it's either you're making space for it or it's somehow happening, in a storage room or otherwise.
Yeah, but to be clear, the extended day is still here. We're not getting rid of extended day. We're just talking about a separate office and a separate storage room that we don't have right now.
We do have an extended day storage room at Neary, Woodward, and Finn, but the office is at Finn, so we don't have a separate office in each location, Kathy.
Okay, so that unless I missed
I think we
something,
need to move on to the assumptions here at this point, because we have a couple other items still to come.
I think that was pretty much it from the comments. The 610 had similar questions, comments, and we can, Jason, I sent these out to you. I can resend these with the new sort of blue notes that I'm trying to take as we go. And you can distribute those for folks to look at later.
Yeah, I'll distribute that version to the committee. And then I think, Craig, I'd ask you to kind of think offline how you want to address these, and we can revisit on Monday. And obviously, it's a discussion with Arrow Street educators or Andrew or Kathy offline. Obviously, whatever you think needs to happen. And whether you can make any progress on the number or not, and or articulate kind of why you couldn't or what we'd be giving up, I think will be helpful. But I want to give you some chance to digest it with your team and not individually. Kathy, do you think the assumptions are cost related
Yes.
or related
Yes.
to, all right, so I'm going to ask you to hold those for a second. And what I'd like to do is go to item D on the agenda and have Katie or Larry or whoever's presenting the various options and considerations that we need to be thinking about, because I think we need to understand those first, especially if there is a cost consideration, and then we can go through all your cost modeling assumptions, etc. Is that okay with everyone? All right. Hearing no objections, Eric, if you want to jump to that part.
Has the presentation ready to present?
Yep, I will bring that up. Let's see here. Okay, can everybody see this? Great. So this is a summary slide, and we're going to kind of go through each of the different options one by one, but just as a way of kind of highlighting everything we've been talking about. The goal, as you know, is that we have 3 options that get sent for the cost estimator. And there's the sort of B4 option. There's a C1 option, which currently has 2 variations that we're going to talk about. And there's a C4 option, which has 2 variations. So the hope is that by the end of the meeting tonight, we'll have a decision about which C1 and which C4 get chosen for the pricing. And so we have a summary slides again at the end of the slide deck to compare them again, but I think it's instructive to just kind of see the full sort of map of everything we've been talking about. So what I'm going to first dive into is the C1 options, and the C1A is the 3-story option. And then what will follow is the 2-story option. We went ahead and drew that one up so that everybody could have a look at it. I know we were talking about it last, I guess it was Monday night, but we've now drawn through it and had a chance to share this with Greg, and we'll let him share his thoughts as well, of course. So as a reminder, this C1A 3-story option, this is largely the same as you saw it on Monday night. We've been trying to keep up with all the, any adjustments that are happening in this, excuse me, in the spreadsheet to keep this on par with it so that it's as tight as it needs to be and is mirroring the spreadsheet. But in terms of the general scheme, being that there's a sort of 3-story bar with 2 levels of classrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor, that remains. I'm going to go probably relatively quickly through this one, and raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question and stop me. Sorry, did someone? No, okay. So the 2nd floor is the 4th grade. We were showing a couple of variations on how the Learning Commons could work, and we'll see that here in the C options. We're showing it one way in the C1 options, and the C4 options that follow, we're showing it a different way. This is looking at a method of sort of consolidating that space in the center of the floor plate, and in the C4 options, it's distributed as we've been talking about. So if you notice a difference, that's what that is, and it's I just want to point that out. So 2nd floor is the 4th grade. Moving up to the 3rd floor, that's the 5th grade in this option. And so looking at what a 2-story scenario could be, this looked at, so the goal would be to keep, a grade level on still intact on one floor. And so what we looked at was essentially taking, I'm going to just jump back for a second to the 3-story option. If you imagine taking that 1st floor and taking the music and art classrooms and placing them on top of the administration and media on the 2nd level, that's essentially what we've done, and that allowed us to kind of then drop down the grade 4 and 5 onto the floor, onto the 1st and 2nd floors. There are, of course, some other things can continue to move around, but this was a sort of straightforward way to maintain the building efficiency and sort of just have something that we could all look at and respond to. I think maybe before we talk about the C4 options, which is the 610, we should entertain questions that we have, or if, Greg, if you want to speak to the 2 options, it might be useful to do that now.
Sure. So I think we've had a lot more opportunity to give the 3-story option some discussion and thought as a leadership team. I think that the preference is a 2-story. I think that adjacencies in a 2-story is much more efficient. I think we do have a 3-story building really changes kind of the dynamic of a building. I think 3rd floor to 1st floor has a different feeling in terms of location, proximity, and adjacencies. I think that if there was a significant cost difference in a 2-story building versus a 3rd-story building, or space constraints on the site, that would be considered. But I think for the ed programming, adjacencies, and the overall climate, culture, and operation of the building, the 2-story option is the option the leadership team supports.
Great, thanks.
Greg, were you here? You weren't here at the last meeting, right?
I was not. I was at a select board meeting.
So this is where I said that I thought you had, well, I was here. You weren't at a select board meeting.
Northborough.
Oh, sorry. Thought I missed a select board meeting. So this is where I said that I thought you had a strong preference for the 2-story building instead of 3. And I asked Jason to keep me honest, and he didn't say I was not being honest. But the architects did say you'd save about, I think, $680,000 on the 3-story versus 2-story. But here's one where I really think what you think is kind of, at least in my mind, again, I'll speak for me, and for my vote, is what you think is most important. But there is a money savings, just FYI, which I don't think you had heard that number between the 2 and the 3.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be in a tough spot to speak, so I'm gonna ask Denise to chair the rest of the meeting, but I'll call on Andrew and then go on mute. And this is the participant.
Sure, okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think I like the 2. I mean, obviously I like the cost savings of the 3, but I agree with Kathy. I defer to Greg in terms of that. My only concern would be putting music on either the library or on top of the principal's office. Get that band playing real good and get that drum set going. So maybe there's some swapping of, I don't know, the cafeteria is underneath it or some other space, right? Or something else that maybe doesn't have as much of a concern, or the soundproofing or something. But that's the only thing I saw that was a little funny. But
Yeah, I will say that when we were able to speak with Greg earlier today, the feedback was the preference would be for the music and arts to be actually on the first floor if possible, and that's certainly something we could look at. This is, there are absolutely variations within this. Thank you.
okay.
Mark, you were next. Mark, I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Slow. We're staring at savings on a 3-story building, and we're staring at future savings because we've got a smaller roof, and potentially other issues. If this includes all the educational programs that we were talking about earlier, and we're showing significant savings, I'm more inclined to look at a 3-story building, because I just don't see the negatives, and we're taking a slug of cash off the table. That's just my take on it.
Any other comments before we move on? Okay. So I guess we're going to go to your next set of slides.
Yes, I'll move on to the next one. Thank you. So here's everyone can see this, right? This is the C4A option. So this is 610 enrollment, and it's the orientation of this is that we've got the public and shared spaces on the public face of the building, and the academic spaces in a 2-story volume set in the rear, with the media space as sort of a connecting element between the two. To walk through the floor plans here, and this one is largely the same as we saw earlier this week, but just as a reminder, this looks at, like the other schemes, locating the building as much as possible atop the existing Neary foundation location. And you can see the kind of general, in the office, we're talking about it as a sort of butterfly scheme, in the sense that you've got these wings that are expanding out to the left and right and front and back. And On the second level, you'll see that those are the classrooms for the 2 additional grade levels on the rear bar. And so we're comparing and contrasting this to the C4B option, where the primary difference is that instead of using the media as a sort of connecting volume on the main first floor level, we look at moving that up to the second floor. And what that can allow for is a somewhat more efficient footprint on the ground. The building in its entirety is the same size, but the amount of foundation is somewhat reduced. And so that's possible with a slightly different kind of configuration of the overall layout. We've got the shared and public spaces sort of facing the existing fields, with the 2 wings of the classroom bars coming off the back of that. And I'll go to the so the first floor here, you see in this case the entry would be likely located sort of opposite the athletic fields, as opposed to sort of facing the access road. But we have the cafeteria, arts and music, auditorium, and gym and health all along this sort of front zone. And then we have the classroom bars on the back. And you can see here we've drawn the learning commons with the idea, and I'll zoom in a little bit, as the sort of embedded zones within the circulation zone for the classrooms. Both can work in both the prior scheme or in this one, so that's something that doesn't have to be determined tonight. We just wanted to test it a couple of ways. And then going up to the second floor here, we've got again 2 more grade levels and the media. So we looked at, there's some things obviously to work out here. Is the media only accessed from one side or not? It's obviously more efficient if we don't have to build a connection between this other classroom wing and the media. But by and large, the main difference, the headline difference between these, is that there's a somewhat smaller footprint by taking the media and putting it on the second floor.
Mark, is your hand still up? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Okay, Andrew, you're next.
So I think I like this one that's shown right here. One question I had, so is there, in this one, is there 8 learning commons? Like
So it's the same total amount. So it's 4 250 square foot zones per grade level. So it's, if you recall, it's carried as 1,000. So the prior, in the C1 schemes, we showed it as a single space at 1,000 square feet. Here you're seeing it as 4 200 square foot.
And would that be entirely encapsulated in the grossing factor in this situation?
They would be counted as the net. That 1,000 square feet would be counted in the net.
So but we'd still have grossing factor on that.
Yeah. So one thing to not all, if you draw a little boundary around a particular section of the building, the grossing factor is different in one area versus another. So like the grossing factor, if you take this front bar with these very large spaces, it's much more efficient because there's fewer walls and fewer hallways and a lot of net space. If you take, an area that's got more circulation and more walls, your grossing factor is going to be, so it averages out across the building to the 1.5, but it's just something to be aware of.
I think then my other 2 questions are, in this model, is there more that we could put on the second floor, kind of above that right bar? Seems like there's a lot. I mean, just the media, seems like there's a lot of other roof there. Or, if we didn't do the auditorium, we could put it in that space below and kind of keep only the second floor for the grade configurations.
Yeah, so I think, common to all of these schemes, because they all include an auditorium, if that came out of the project, all of the footprints would reduce, in a similar amount. Yes, the answer is that there are ways to take, for example, some of the arts and music programs could potentially be on the second floor. I think, Greg had shared some thoughts educationally about that, but could we build it on the second level? The answer is yes. However, it gets, there's some of these large spaces, when you build on top of them, you have to start to take extra steps. The
Yeah.
roof structure needs to suddenly be more robust, and more, therefore more cost goes into that than if it wasn't that way.
Yeah. That's
This-
kind of what I was getting. Like, seems like a lot of cost to make it structurally enough to put the media center on top. And that's the only thing that's going to be, on the roof, right?
Yeah, I mean, we did
Well,
look in this. The reason it's sitting where it is because it's sitting atop the arts and music spaces, which would not trigger sort of additional structural deeper beams and things like that. On another project, we were looking at in an earlier phase, placing classrooms atop a gymnasium, and after reviewing that with the engineer and understanding, that meant that your roof structure has to change like that. We revised it and kind of decided
Yeah,
to keep
okay.
it off because it just, if you keep it more simple, it's going to be less expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say though, probably we need to adjust our drawings because the gym itself will be 2 stories. So it would
Yes.
actually be a sort of open to below space. It wouldn't be the roof at this level. And the cafeteria is often a floor and a half to 2 floors, depending on how that works out. So, and the auditorium would be probably 2 floors. So what you're seeing, even though it looks like a continuous roof with the media center sitting on top of it, it's actually a bunch of open to below spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Mostly is if we didn't do the auditorium, we put the media center there, you wouldn't have to do as much structural stuff or whatever. But maybe there's a benefit to that.
Andrew, are you done? I was gonna
Yeah,
go to
I do.
Kathy. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Denise. So this is one of the assumptions I wanted to challenge, but since Andrew AP, well, we've got 2 APs here, so I can't do my normally. So Andrew Plum brought this up. I just want to clarify something. The gross up factor, the 1.5 that we're using right now, and I know that's what the MSBA, that's their max. And I know that's probably very standard practice to use that, certainly initially. But the projects that I've looked at, the ones actually done at this point, seem to, in the end, in many cases, end up with a gross up factor that was less than 1.5, 1.41, 1.42, whatever, which again is a lot of money on a big project, right? So when do you know, and I don't know what the right word I'm looking for here is, when do you know what that space is that's subject to the gross up actually is? When you get schematic done and you really know what it is? I mean, you're not going to exactly have 1.5, right? It's going to be something else in the end, correct? As far as
it's going to be
Yes,
something
correct.
less than 1.5.
right, okay, because that's, so it will be less, right? But you don't know to the schematics done. Is that when you really know what that extra space is? That's not the program space, the classroom space, the usable space. What's the word on, what should I call that space? It's not dead space because some of it's bathrooms and stuff, right? So I don't know what to call that space. It's subject to that factor, but whatever that space is, when do you really know how much that is? And I understand that it's reimbursable, except of course we don't get dollar for dollar. We get 20%, right? So it still would behoove us to reduce that when we can, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I could explain that a little more. The multiplier, the grossing factor of 1.5 is sort of a rule of thumb. When you actually lay out toilet rooms, when you lay out mechanical rooms, when you lay out closets and pipe chases and mechanical chases and exterior walls and interior walls and all those spaces, those all add up to the gross amount, which then you can do the math on it and say, okay, if I got this much net and the building is this big gross, that's my grossing factor. So it's, at the moment, it's being used as a multiplier, a little bit of a rule of thumb, but a little bit of a rule of science. But in the end, it'll be how we draw all the walls, how we draw all the little spaces, how we draw the telephone closets and the mechanical rooms and all those little things that then contribute to the overall gross area of the building.
So Larry and Katie, do you then strive to minimize that space to the extent you can? Is
Sure.
that part of what
Yeah.
your effort will be between August and April to minimize that space?
Yeah, I would say it pretty much lands in schematic design. Sometimes there's some tweaks in design development, but it usually lands pretty tightly in schematic design. And you can say, okay, there's this many square feet of exterior wall. Now the exterior walls these days are about 20 to 24 inches thick. So, you know, a slight tweak, and we've done this where you say, okay, can we squeeze it down to 20 inches? And, you know, that pulls a lot of area out of the building, although if most people looked at it, you wouldn't notice it.
And this is an area I wouldn't think Greg would care about. He cares about where the students are being taught. This is an area that I would think he would encourage you to try to be as efficient as possible. So are
Sure.
you saying, and I won't hold you to this, but are you saying in the end, you would expect that 1.5 to be something less?
Yes.
Okay, that's all you have to say for now. Okay, I'm done.
Any more updates on the slides?
I think, well, I could go to the summary slides, which might be useful for people to see things side by side.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna, let me just, so what you've got here are the two C1 alternatives. This is the 305 enrollment. On the top, it's the 3D view of the 3-story building that we've seen already tonight. And on the bottom, it's the 3D views of the 2-story building. Just to give you a kind of side-by-side comparison. And I've got as well the floor plans, again, across the top, that's the 3-story version, and then the bottom is the 2-story version. And then on here, I've got the next comparison of the C4 scheme. So on the top, we've got C4A on the top 2 images, and C4B on the bottom 2 images. I'm not sure if we had a chance yet to hear from Greg about his thoughts educationally on these two. I know we did talk about it earlier today.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I think Andrew brought this up, the preferred option is one where the media center and the music spaces are on the first floor. I think in terms of music spaces, we are thinking about the adjacency to the cafeteria and having that cafetorium connected to kind of the music instructional space. So I think that C4A is in terms of the media center and music being located on the first floor is the preferred option from an educational standpoint.
Greg, we could do that though if we didn't do the auditorium, right? We could move the media
Correct.
to the first floor. Okay. I think I'm leaning
Yep.
towards the C4.
Yeah.
B, no auditorium. BNA.
From a,
Any other
and just from a,
questions?
just
Any
from
other
a,
questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead.
and Denise, just from a, you know, again, from the programmatic side,
Mhm.
having the media center being kind of the connector, the hub of the school in the center is just one of the differences between, you know, C4A and C4B. So that was another conversation we had as kind of a leadership team.
And Greg, you're saying that that was a preference. I believe
A preference.
mentioned that in one of the ones that we had seen during the ed planning that you liked that configuration, right?
Correct.
And I think from my own perspective, when the cost estimators come back, I'd like to be able to see, to Mark's point, I'd like to be able to see the cost savings on the 3 floors versus the 2 floors. I understand the educational impact. I'd just like to know that the cost when they come back with their estimates. Is that a doable?
Are we gonna ask them to do that? So
Well,
far, we haven't agreed that we're gonna ask them to do it both ways.
Yeah,
That's what I'm asking. Is that doable?
at this point, we're looking at one scheme for each of the
Okay.
C1s, one scheme for the C4, and then the B4
Okay,
from our estimator.
okay. All right, all right,
We
so
did-
go
We
ahead.
did get feedback from the cost estimator when we asked them to compare the the 3-story versus the 2-story. And that's where we got the 630,000 savings on the 3-story was the feedback that we received.
Okay. And I think Kathy, we need, if there's nothing else on these plans, I think we need to go back to some questions or some assertions you have, Kathy.
Yes, Denise.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just talked about the gross up factor. I'm fine with that one as far as understanding that that 1.5 may is expected to come down to something less than that. And that again helps a lot. Every little bit helps. The next one is soft cost. Okay, so we're carrying 25% right now. If you go back, and I went back to 2015 and looked at all of the MSBA projects, there is no soft cost anywhere near 25%. If I define soft cost as architect and OPM and all of their subcontractors, the only other thing that's listed in soft costs, it was really small stuff besides the contingency. And we've got a separate 15% contingency. So that shouldn't be in the number I'm talking about. We've got that separate. So that shouldn't be part of the 25%. So can someone explain why we're using 25% when each one of them almost consistently was about 15%? And Errol Street's part of some of the, or at least one was Errol Street's, Skanska was several of them. So you guys were in this 15%. And the architects were about 10, maybe 10, 11, and then the OPM was 3, 4. So why are we using 25% for soft cost instead of something that looks like it's should be closer to at least no more than 20%? But again, these were all 15% when you just looked at OPM and architect.
So the 25% was used with the information at the time for PDP. And again, being conservative. Now that we understand more about the logistics of the site, that the kids will be moved off site. We know more about our moving costs. We know more about that's included within the soft costs, moving costs, swing space modulars. We understand now that they would like to have 4 modulars so we can build cost into that, like we discussed in the last meeting. There are, and you are correct for what we're carrying for OPM fees and designer fees. That goes off of construction cost. So yeah, we will likely come down from that 25 now that we have a better picture of some of the logistics, and now that we're dialing in on the construction costs.
Jim, the project costs, which is the 0.25 or 0.2, whatever it ends up being, also includes the IT equipment,
Thank you.
FF&E, and those sorts of things, as well as additional testing that may be required throughout construction. And so it's not necessarily just soft costs, it's project costs. And I know you guys have a whole 3011 sheet that you've got a sort of working draft on for all those bits and pieces, but we should be mindful it's not just professional fees, but it also includes these other project costs.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I went from 15 to 20 because I knew included, and I knew the FF&E is there too. So we just need to sharpen our pencil on this one because we really can use conservatively 20 instead of 25. That's 5%. That's a lot of money. So can we please, at least in the next few days, try to sharpen that now that we know that it's 4 modulars. We've got an idea of what the living costs are. We know we've got a number for FF&E. So let's get this in there and let's see what the percentage really is and not just use an inflated number because we're trying to be really conservative.
Yeah, and that's the process we're going through. Again, we're going through the construction costs, going through the soft costs, and dialing that in, and we'll continue to do that throughout the process. So,
okay, so that's one. All right, so you're working on that one, and we talked about gross up. Let's talk about the auditorium. So I looked at 33 MSBA funded projects that are fairly recent. Only 6, this is elementary school, only 6 have an auditorium. The other 27 have, I think, have some form of the cafetorium, if I've got the word right, or gymatorium, if I've got that word right. So, and then the MSBA itself makes a pretty strong case for why they don't believe you need a separate auditorium for an elementary school. And I will say this, and one of the reasons they say that you don't need it is not that you've got one next door. They don't even bring that up in their pros and cons. So the pros are pretty weak and the cons are very strong. And the fact that only 6 out of 33 have done it, and that's less than 20%, close to 20%, tells me that we fairly quickly, I'm even to the point, I don't even want to do it at all. I just don't see any way that we can afford that auditorium, and I don't see any justification for it, given you got Charty right up the street, especially if we end up with a 2-grade school. You get 2 grade to 2 grade, or excuse me, 2 to 3 grades. So you've got 504 seats in Trotter, you'd have 305 students here. So that's what they're doing right now. So I really have trouble even continue to show the auditorium. So that's number 3. Soft costs. Okay, reimbursement rate that I referred to earlier. So Jim, you and I can have this, can you send me your computation of the 18% so I can see how you got to it? So I don't want to talk about it anymore, try to see exactly how you got to it. Start with the 39.84 and show me how you got down to 18. I just want to see that. And then
I can say quickly that looking at other projects, the delta between the reimbursement rate and effective rate ranges from a 35-point drop to a 15-point drop. We're carrying a 21-point drop right now. So, you know, if you look at that average, it's more like 28 is the average drop in the effective rate. So again, I think we're being conservative, but not overly conservative. But yeah, we can discuss that offline.
Okay, and have you also factored yet into so I'm looking at Hopkinton for this. That was my comparison. So they got 5 extra points because of various things. Have we started lining up what those points might be for where we think we're going? Is that part of this, or have you just excluded that completely for the moment?
For the moment, we've excluded that. Obviously, as part of the PSR, we have to submit what points we're going to go for sustainability. With the average, you know, it's 0 to 4. The average can be, you know, on a normal project, 1.5 to 2 additional points. So, yeah, when you're looking at this a rate, and this is from experience, that there are many variables as we go through the process. And in the PDP review comments, MSBA even commented on that in one portion, I think it was the budget statement, we were saying an assumed rate of 18%. And the MSBA cautioned us that until the PFA is signed, we do not know what that effective rate is.
Okay, I get that. You said you made that clear, but now I'm asking something different. Where is the spreadsheet that's starting to try to understand what points we might get based on where we are? You say PSR. Well, PSR is coming quickly. And again, if the vote that we're going to take on August 12th, for some people, depends on what we think the cost is, we need as much information as we can. And so therefore, you know, being overly conservative versus being conservative is probably not the way to approach it. So I'd like to understand, I'd like to have a separate conversation with you as far as what the points really could be, and, you know, where we think we're going with the design as far as which ones we could get. And then I believe you get some points if you kept part of the old building too, if I'm not wrong about that. So, you know, before we throw out the old building completely, maybe we still give it one more shot at keeping something, if there's something that makes sense to keep, if we get some points out of it.
Which would be the ad reno scheme.
Yeah. All right, and remember,
but the ad reno scheme, Jim, is keeping the entirety of the building and adding to it. Right, versus if we looked at the other new schemes, right, those are over the existing. If there's four walls of the existing building that we could reuse, or the foundation, right? And that goes into your, that goes into the renovation reuse up to 5 points, right? Say you keep the old gymnasium and that becomes the auditorium, just as an example, right?
I mean,
You know what I mean?
the cost of that for salvage of a particular part of the building will likely zero out that any benefit. I'll just put that fairly bluntly. It's difficult to maintain one portion of the building. Logistically, having to upgrade structure, I lean on Arrow Street for that piece, but it's not a straight line calculation. That if you keep a portion of the building, you're getting that money back because of the cost to maintain it and salvage that portion of the building.
Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the auditorium has got me perplexed. Especially if we're asking the estimators to give us a firm number. If I take C4B, which is the one where the wings go south, where the media center is up on the second level, and we don't do an auditorium, which we won't know until we get to town meeting, there's some significant savings by putting it downstairs. So I'm one that says we should make the determination now and either get rid of the auditorium or keep it. But there's some significant financial impacts to it. Otherwise, I'm going to look to see if the estimators can tell us that. So if they estimate C4B, we need an estimate without the auditorium and moving the media center back down to the first floor.
Greg?
So we know what that number is, because the auditorium may be X number of thousands of dollars, but it also means that the school's going to be less expensive. So somehow we got to capture that number. Maybe it's simple in some of the other versions. I don't think it is. But I want to know what the savings are if we don't have an auditorium in these schemes.
Greg, you had your hand up.
Yes. So
I'm sorry, Mark, were you finished?
Yep.
I'm sorry, Mark. Greg?
Yes. So from a programmatic standpoint, I did have extensive conversations with the music teachers. Their feeling is that it's undersized for what they would like to have programmatically. Therefore, unless it's the right size, which is more to a significant larger auditorium, they're inclined not to have an auditorium. And that is the increase of the 1,800 that we talked about in lieu of an auditorium, and the 950 for the music room. So I think that was important information that the music educators provided around programmatically what the auditorium would or would not provide.
Thank you. Andrew?
Greg, so if we did go with the C4B, I know you like the C4A because the media center was kind of like the right in the middle of the two kind of wings. Just, obviously you could redesign it, but if that did take the place of the auditorium in C4B, it would kind of be in that same central location. Would that change your opinion of C4B?
Yes. I mean, I think that I guess one of the questions I would have is there a cost savings to C4A or B? So remove the auditorium from both of those. Is one more efficient in design, therefore less expensive? And that would be my determining factor, Andrew. If C4A and C4B were identical in cost, my preferred option would be C4A.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, last meeting, A was more expensive because of how it was laid out. There's like more hallway getting from one side to the other, but I'll defer to Andrew or Jim or one of the other experts.
I don't remember that being said. Is that true, architects?
C4A has marginally more foundation than C4B, to the tune of maybe 9,000 square feet, and in comparison, the difference in square footage of foundation, or sorry, I think that's on par, maybe slightly less than the C1 comparison of the 3-story to the 2-story. So it's something, but it's a marginable amount.
Andrew, we don't think $600,000 is marginal, just so you know.
But-
Okay, you think C4B is $600,000 less than C4A? Is that what you're saying? Because it's 630 for C1 between 3-story and 2-story. Is that so? You think it's 600K? And I know this is
I think it's a similar. We didn't run this by the cost estimator, the C4 scenarios. It is a similar amount of reduction of the foundation to the C1 that we got feedback on. So I would expect that his response would be in the similar ballpark, but probably slightly less.
and then B is less than A, or A is less than B?
B should cost less than A.
And Greg, you're agnostic as far as A or B?
Greg, you're muted.
If the media
Greg's
center
muted.
can be, if the auditorium is repurposed in terms of the design and is more central, then, I think C4A and C4B could work programmatically. And therefore, what would weigh in my decision if both meet the programmatic requirements, I would defer to cost savings.
And if there is no auditorium at all?
Correct. In either C4A or C4B.
Okay.
Kathy, do you still have more comments before I move
One more
on?
of my assumptions, which is the contingency that we're carrying right now. So Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 15% at this point?
Yes, I'd have to pull that up, but yeah, it's in that range.
Okay, and I understand that by the time we, bid this out, get construction bids, that 15 goes down. I get that, but again, we got to use what we've got now to make a decision. So, architects, Jim, is there any way to legitimately lower that, given the big amount that 15% is being multiplied against, to something that would save us some projected estimated cost right now?
So obviously, if we're leaning towards a new build, you carry one contingency and a ad reno another. But that exercise we're doing as well in parallel with the soft costs exercise. So we'll have more information on what percentage we're carrying.
Greg, your hand is down, correct? You down, Greg?
Correct.
Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah, are we doing more soil borings? Did we agree we were doing one inside the building?
Not have additional borings scheduled at this point.
Yeah, we're limited with our project, with our feasibility project funds right now to do any additional borings.
And I sent over a note, and I'm sure it didn't get fully vetted. That the biggest, to get rid of a contingency and to make sure you have the best contingency in the world, is to take away all the unknowns. The biggest unknown we have is what's under that building, because that's where we're putting either a new building or we're building over the existing building. We need to know what's going on underneath it. So if we're concerned with a 15% contingency, then my recommendation is that we need to do some more soil borings so that we can take that off the table. What we don't want to be exposed to is having to do what we were planning to do out in the fields, which is to remove all the fill 6 feet down and go through the dewatering process just to put the building where the existing one is. So it may be something to consider, just to do not only one inside the building, but if it's simpler, in front of the building, because we're going to be potentially building structures there as well. We just need to kind of get that unknown taken care of.
What would the test that Mark thinks we should do cost roughly?
What we had in our, the work that was already, done. Sorry, I'm just gonna pull it up really quickly. I believe that the single day of testing, which was multiple locations, meaning multiple borings, it was 4. I believe it was $10,000. They work effectively on a daily rate, you know, it's, the cost to come out there is a certain portion of it, so you can't necessarily get one for 2,500, but you might be able to get a half day or something along those lines. Let me check that number really quickly, to make sure that's accurate.
Mark, you think 4 is enough?
Actually, I think 3 could be enough. If you do 1 inside and 2 just outside the front entrance of you could get away with 2. 1 outside in the front of the building and 1 inside the building.
But if worst case scenario, we do 4 of them, that's 10 grand, right?
3
Kathy,
yeah.
we can find 10 grand.
Yes, we can, and I know exactly where to find it, very easily.
I just think that that's going to take away the biggest unknown we have. Because we'll get to August and we still won't know what's under that building until we actually get into it.
If I excuse me for a moment, Katie, did I understand what you said when you said it's a fee for the morning? So it's not by drilling hole, it's a fee for them to be out there for the morning. Is that correct?
What we had done, for the work that they'd done already was a single day. We paid them $10,000 for a single day. I was just making the point that, there is a certain amount of cost for them to mobilize and come out there. So you can't necessarily just buy a single one for $2,500. You could probably buy a half day, but I don't know, it may not just be 5 either. So there is something to consider. I'm purely quoting the single day we already paid was $10,000. And I did check that against our contract, and that was what we paid.
The other thing we should check is doing it inside the building is a little more difficult than doing it with a big rig outside. So we want to be cautious throwing around numbers of 10,000 and 4 holes. That we should get quotes on all that before you guys try to commit to it.
Okay, Mark, you had your hand up again. And wait, did I see, I'm sorry, but somebody, Andrew, was your hand up and I missed it?
Yeah, I think I commented. All right, I'm good.
Well,
But I think, yeah, I mean, I think if Arrow Street would feel more comfortable having those test results done to give us a firmer number in terms of site, conditions and soil conditions, et cetera.
And contingency.
Yeah, and how we can lower the contingency, et cetera, then, I think it's worth doing that exercise now. And if we're out of money, let's understand what the costs are and see if we can't find a source for it.
So let me just ask, are you guys envisioning that this is happening between now and the 12th when you're trying to decide an option?
Yes.
Interesting.
Assuming you can get it done, assuming that there's someone available to come do this, I can get the money fairly quick. I got to have the select board vote, but there's a pot of money that we need to spend before the end of the year. So we can spend it.
Okay.
And my thinking is, and Jim Burrows, you can answer this, if popping 3 holes in front of the building gives you enough information to assume what's underneath the building, then skip doing it inside the building. Because that is far more complicated and probably requires a much smaller piece of equipment specialized to go through the foundation. But if it's a 1-day project to pop 4 holes somewhere as close to the foundation as we can get, I think we're going to solve a mystery.
And if the reason for us not doing this already is because we didn't think we had the money to do it because the $950 is pretty much spent, then we should be doing this anyway. And so I will commit to getting select board to appropriate the money quickly.
Yeah, I think Kathy, that we thought the school was going to be in a different location, right?
That's
So I think
exactly.
now it's especially as we look, if we look at the models or the options tonight, right? they're sitting on top of the foundation. So I agree with you, Mark. Some are probably close to what's already there, but some might be to where, in theory, this new building, if we pick, kind of choose an option or two options, might sit elsewhere, a little bit for, maybe it's the playground near the playground, or it's part of the parking lot, or wherever that layout on top of the old building, is going to be. I defer to Arrow Street to pick 3 or 4 spots that are worth checking.
So my caution on this is the percentages that we usually carry are based on historical data of other projects. When you do soil testing, and Arrow Street chime in if you are putting a toothpick in 4 different areas, you can move 10 feet to the right and have an issue. So I would lean more towards carrying and we can obviously, to Kathy's point, look at the contingency, see what we're carrying, and compare it against other projects. But I would caution a drastic reduction because of the results of 4 boring holes.
I think, Jim, for me, it's less of the overall 15% contingency, and the fact that we basically said by moving it, we're not going to have the same issues we did on the field, and we're taking those costs out. That part, I'd like to make sure that removal conversation was the correct one, and that we don't have the same issue. So it's less of a contingency, more, do we have the site costs in the budget accurate? If that makes sense.
Well, I'm going to say it's both. It's an and, not an or. So I still want that. I want to see if we can get the contingency down to, 11%, 12%, 10%. But it would also be nice that the estimator doesn't come back with a lot of site cost because he's still unsure of what that soil is. So we still have him in there like we have right now.
I think if it's possible, we should be able to idea if Kathy says that it's going to make everybody feel comfortable and she can find a select board will help us, it's probably not a bad investment. But I do agree with Jim that we can think that it's okay by 4 borings, but until you get to the middle of that building, you don't know. When you get to the middle of the building, God only knows, and to Mark's point, you don't know what's under there. Anything else?
Nope, that was my
Yeah.
list, Denise. That was it.
So do we want to
Okay.
take a motion on whether or not, is this even feasible to get done before we send Kathy out to try to find money for it? And if we all agree that this is a good thing to do, then let's put that in motion.
Is it
actually-
feasible time-wise?
Spoke with our geotechnical consultant yesterday, in fact, because I was forwarding along some of the commentary that was in the MSBA PDP, which was fairly benign. But he called and asked, how do you want me to respond to this, that sort of a thing. And I was actually talking about the possibility that you may want to do more borings. I can call him first thing in the morning and ask him how quickly he can get someone, because really it comes down to, I appreciate, Kathy, you were able to send me a signed proposal so quickly that for the perk testing. So that was very efficient. It really is just if he can get somebody lined up that quickly. So I can call him first thing in the morning and see what he knows about scheduling at this point. If they're scheduling far back because it's summer, or if he's got somebody that he knows is available, it may be, sooner than we think.
And Katie, I've got to have 48 hours to post a select board meeting. I'm going to just do a quick Zoom for one and just so keep me posted. So we know we've got the money before we actually have them come.
And we're talking about 1 day of testing, right? And I can talk about which areas I can discuss with him as well, what we just all talked about as far as within the building or potentially maybe even within the courtyard. I would definitely suggest that we do one of the tests where the area of subsidence is in the parking lot, because that's an area that we know there's something happening. So, I've just identified 3 off the top of my head, and we could do 2 in front of the school. So there's 4. That would be effectively a day of testing, as long as it is a similar amount of time. As Larry was saying, it's within the building, it's a different piece of equipment.
So-
I'll get more information from him on a phone call tomorrow.
So I think what I would suggest to the board is that we put the vote or the motion off until Monday. We are actually going to, Jason wants to put off the vote on the motion for the cost estimator because we don't have Roger here, we don't have Chris here. We think that vote should happen on Monday night. So maybe it's prudent to do that vote on Monday night as well. By then, Katie, you'll have an idea of how long, and then a number for money. And then Kathy will be in a position to be able to seek that money. Does that make sense, Kathy?
It does, Denise.
Okay.
But we don't necessarily need the committee to vote on it, right? It's not coming out of our finances, right? It's more whether or not we think it's a good idea to do it. Because the problem is if we wait till Monday, then that means that Kathy's, not going to get her meeting posted to probably Thursday.
I'll go ahead and
Whereas,
post a meeting. I can always cancel it. I'll go ahead and post.
yeah,
a
you
meeting
could post it for
tomorrow,
Tuesday morning.
right?
Yeah.
And then if I need to cancel it, I'll
Okay.
cancel it. But at least I've got it posted. If we're going to do it,
All right, if you post it for Tuesday, and we have this Monday, then maybe it's okay.
I think just to reiterate the fact that we're in agreement to, even though it is still town money and it is in the domain of the Board of Selectmen, that we are in agreement as a building committee to in fact do this and spend that money. So I think we could do that Monday night if that's okay with everybody. Hearing no objections. Anything else? Our meeting schedule going forward is we are definitely, thank you to all you guys giving us that nice calendar right after the last meeting on Monday night. Then our next meeting is on Monday night of next week at 7 o'clock. Larry?
Yeah, I just had two questions. I hear some leaning towards no auditorium. And I would agree with you. I think the complications of the auditorium are pretty robust. You can see we've tripped over ourselves on the space summary. The planning for it is also tricky because we're trying to figure out both how to make it an important part of the building should you decide to proceed with it, and also how you can cut it out if it is not something you want to proceed with. So it's really, I think, and it feels like money is such a concern that I'm sort of wondering, can we make that a decision point? Because I do know in schematic design, we'll want to nail it down exactly what it is. And at that point, you are basically saying to the MSBA, here's the project we want to do. And then they tell you how much they're going to contribute towards it. So it worries me a bit that it's sort of a maybe yes, maybe no moving forward when I hear all the comments about we don't have money. So I put that to you. I think we carry it for the moment, but if you can give that some thought, and Monday we can have a further discussion. The other piece, Kathy, you brought up the question of whether we need indeed to carry improvements to the athletic fields in our project. And I know, and we could put the site plan back up, but I know the $12 million we had for site was partially driven just by the amount of square footage we got in the site. If this group said, you know what, money, we got to pay such attention to it, we're gonna not do the athletic fields, we'll figure out a different way to do it, then we'll put a boundary around that and tell the estimator, okay, here's our site, which is not including all that space, and don't carry money for it. That number will come down. I don't know the amount that would come down, but I just think, again, setting up some parameters for our estimators so you understand the numbers when they come back in 2 weeks would be helpful.
Larry, on that one, I think it has to do with whether or not any of that site work would be reimbursable. And I think we're going to be over the 8 or 10% or whatever, right?
You're going to be well over it.
Yeah. So I think it's
10% of
from an estimator perspective, I think that it's, if we want to go and do a separate, talk with our recreation team and do a separate estimate, or maybe figure out if we want to have CPA funds or something like that, then maybe we do it separately. But I think unless we want the estimator to come up with an idea, I think we keep it separate.
I don't. I want the town to figure this one out, Andrew, if you agree. We've got some ideas about what to do here. Larry, will you finish your thought? It's 10% of what?
10% of the building construction cost
Okay.
is the cap they put
hard
on it.
cost? Hard cost,
Yes,
not soft cost, hard cost.
correct.
Okay.
And that's the cap, and it goes somewhat, but I would guess it'll cover maybe a quarter to a third of what you're gonna need to spend.
And just put a finer point on it, just the building cost with demo and abatement backed out. So it's 10% of that dollar value.
Say that again, Jim.
So it's 10% of the building cost, meaning the actual building, which is, and then you back out abatement, demo and abatement. So it's 10% of just the building cost without demo and abatement.
So the brand new part of the building.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
Okay, and why, Larry, do you think we're going to be so over that? Let's just assume for a moment that we've got pretty good soil underneath most of the footprint for both of the two. Why do you think we're going to be well over the 10%? If
Because most everybody is.
okay.
I think it's it's a certain amount of money, but it doesn't cover all your site costs typically.
And Larry, is that the site prep line or is that the other site construction roll up?
It's usually in the site, in the summary page, it's the site, and then you've got the demo, and you've got hazardous abatement, and then you've got new construction. So it's that
Okay.
piece, which is the 12 million.
Got it. Okay.
So, if everybody was in agreement, and again, give it some thought for Monday, is we can draw a red line on this drawing, and thanks, Andrew, for putting it back up. You could put a red line basically that says, okay, we're going to pick up an area around our building, but the athletic fields, that whole area stays as is, and the town figures out different ways to improve that if you want to improve it, or you just leave it. And you say, okay, we're going to draw that red line as close as we can for estimating purposes, that then drives the definition of what the site work is for the project.
So the demo and the abatement are not part of site cost, they're separate?
Correct.
Correct.
And are they reimbursable?
No.
Correct.
No? Is
No.
that what it is, no? Okay, so we're on our own on those.
Yeah, I think we were carrying what, 1.5 for that
To demo.
demo and abatement.
Yeah, I don't have the estimate, but that sounds about right.
Katie, you want to try and pull that up?
So,
Or I
so
can
Kathy,
do
my
that?
thought is, the more we put it into the MSBA, we're not going to get a match, and I don't know if there's an efficiency of including it in that contract or not. But, we don't know what we want to do with that, and what is the estimate? I mean, it's existing fields, right? The estimator's not going to know that, okay, we want to add an irrigation system or convert the baseball field to I don't know, or whatever, right? That's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to figure out what we want to redo with that site.
You're
That the
talking about
estimator's
current
not-
athletic fields.
Correct.
Okay, so you're advocating to pull it in?
I'm advocating to not have the estimator look at the fields, and us having conversations with recreation or the schools or whatever on what is our vision for that space, and coming up with something. But I don't think we have enough information to get any sort of accurate number from the estimator on what to do with the fields.
I agree. And what's the point of it if it's not going to be reimbursed anyway? Why don't
Exactly.
we just keep that separate and then see what we can do with CPA funds, whatever, down the road?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
100%, because we're not going to get that cost back.
Yeah.
Correct. In terms of before the next meeting, because we're not going to vote on the options tonight, is it possible to get what is it, C1, C2B? Is that the 610 with the media center on the second floor? C4B?
Or B.
Is it possible to get a C4B with the media center where the auditorium is kind of done to?
By
Could
Monday?
work on it some tomorrow. I don't know how quickly we can turn it around.
Okay.
So if I understood correctly, we're putting off, because we have 2 members missing. We're putting off the vote on which to go forward with. And also we're adding a question of the auditorium on next Monday night as well. Any other questions? before I
Well, I
open
think
it to
it's,
public.
you know, I think we're leaning towards, and I think, you know, Greg, you know, even said, you know, unless we're going to make the auditorium much larger, which personally wasn't for it at its current size. And I think there's a lot of people shaking their head that they're not probably enough for a quorum. Let's assume that we're not going to move forward with the auditorium, right? And then if we can have the option or the options of the C4, but I think it sounded like the C4B, which was less expensive, might be gaining some traction. If we could see a C4B without the media center on the second floor and on the first floor, at least when I took a pulse of the room, it sounded like that might be a direction that everybody was headed, that I'd like to see that as an option that we could vote on.
But yet, did I miss, Kathy, did I miss you in misreading what you said, that you want to leave that auditorium up to town meeting vote?
No, no more do I, after I read what the
Okay.
SBA said about it. I just think we need to just get rid of it.
Okay.
We just got to truly get the cost down and not even look at that as an add-on, because I don't see how we ever get there, Denise.
Okay, so I would feel, I think I would feel better if we wait till Monday night just to take it off the table, but I love Andrew's idea about coming back to us if you can possibly make it happen. Removing that and giving us that space differently redesigned, if possible. And then we'll vote on these options for next Monday night.
And remember, Katie thinks that they were going to go with only two options, the estimator, one for the two, one for the four. We've now got two for the two and two for the four. So we've got to make up our mind Monday whether we're going to ask them four versus three versus two.
Versus that, exactly.
If this helps make it any easier, the C4 scheme seems, the difference between the A and the B seems a little bit closer, whereas the two-story versus the three-story on the C1 scheme is a little bit more crucial to have some sort of direction, just because they are different enough for our estimator. The one for C4, the square footages are very similar. The footprint could be very similar. Although I suppose it does, the B option touches lighter on the site. But it would be a little bit easier to try and get close to a number, whereas the C1 option, two-story versus three, is a little bit more important that we have a direction.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, so what we contracted with our estimator for was one estimate in the PSR. We've convinced him to do three estimates. I don't think we can keep adding to that without adding some dollars to him. I think, you know, and we need to present the B4 scheme, the ad reno scheme, to the MSBA because they'll want to see that. So we're basically saying we need to choose one of the small enrollment and one of the large enrollments that we'd like the estimator to do. We can, you know, go back and forth a little bit once we get some numbers back, but
yeah. And
we keep forgetting
on the
Yeah.
and on the C1, right, that's the 305.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's really comes down to how much of a cost efficiency is there for the three-story, because obviously, you know, it sounds like from Greg, from the school's perspective, a three-story is not advantageous. So it's really, is that cost efficiency that great to sacrifice the educational part? But I think that's basically the only conversation there. But
So
I don't know if removing the auditorium changes anything, but because it's kind of separated, I'm assuming that the whole building just goes smaller for both options.
Right.
So
I
it's not
think,
really,
you know, it was 630,000 difference. He did I thought a reasonably
okay,
quick but detailed estimate. So that would be a little less than 1%.
yeah. Okay, so that's just the conversation we have to have next Monday. And Greg, make sure you got your educational programming conversation about the different stories, and we'll go there.
I'll have two stories to share, Andrew.
So I guess I'll ask if there's no other comment among us, and open it up to the public for comment. Is there any public comment?
There is no public.
No
so-
public.
There is no public. Okay, then I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Andrew,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
and I'm I. That's 4-0 for those in
Thank you, everybody.
attendance. Thanks, guys. Good night.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.